Hey, everybody, we are here with Coach Clinton Aegis in our inaugural conversation, and we have high hopes for what we're going to discuss today, but at the same time, as I've said, no pressure. So, Coach, welcome. It's an honor to be able to chat with you. We appreciate having some of your time here.
No, man, I appreciate you, Chris. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, as am I. And just as a reminder to everybody, Coach Clinton is a well-regarded and longtime senior enterprise coach, primarily in the business agility space and the enterprise agility space. But Coach, as we'll see, you've encountered a lot of enterprise factors that we're really interested in. So I'm really looking forward to asking some questions about that. And I thank you in advance. So our topic today is the topic of change management. So that's mostly what we're going to discuss. And Coach, I think you and I have had some chats about this in the past, and we've both encountered a lot of issues related to change management, and it's a pretty popular topic out there in the consulting world. So, as consultants ourselves, we have some things to say about it. So,
Absolutely.
that's what we'll be discussing today. And, Coach, I wondered if we could just start by getting you to share a little bit about how this topic came up with us in our earlier conversations and what triggered it for you, and just share a little bit about your experience from dealing with change challenges in your work.
Yeah, Chris. Well, first of all, again, I really appreciate you having me here, and just to kind of lean in on what you're asking here, right? I mean, we were talking, I guess it was a few weeks back, and we were talking about just, what are we seeing in the environment, right? As consultants, how do we see that, organizations are showing up? And one of the things that came to mind was just how important we feel that change management is, but how it's treated by organizations, right? It's not given its full citizenship, and so I mean that I think that's one of the challenges, right? I mean, organizations want the changes to happen, but there's a lot of financial pressure on those changes to kind of again cause things to maybe go in directions that they're not completely comfortable with. And so, I just kind of want to talk about how organizations might lean in more into change management practices to really, really get the value out of them.
Yeah, change management is one of those things you hear about a lot, and it's one of those topics out there. And there's a lot of topics like this in our space, isn't there, where it's sort of acknowledged by everybody, or it seems like everybody agrees this is really important. There's nobody's going to shoot you down on the importance of change management or other necessities for successful transformation initiatives or whatever type of transitions or transformation initiatives are going on. But then when the rubber hits the road, it can be really hard to execute, right? So it's kind of one of those things. Everybody is on board in theory, but then you find when you get under the hood of the organizational change that the things you really need to actually make the change happen aren't there, right? So I guess quickly yes or no question, would you agree with that summary? And then whether you do or not, maybe you could just share a little bit of those specifics about what you see. Or have you seen situations like that where everybody knows change is important, they know change is going to be necessary to whatever the goal is, and so then maybe they do embrace a formal change management process, or at least the importance of it, but then the mechanics are not there to actually execute the change. Is that something you've run into?
Yeah, so I mean, I had one engagement with the client, and again, keeping that confidential. But this particular client, they brought me in to help lead some transformation, right, to help them as an organization adopt more agile ways of working, and onboarded and was getting going with again helping things get set up. And this organization at the time had a an office of change management, right? So that we had some folks that we were kind of partnering with to identify, what role they will play in the change. And then 2 weeks into the engagement, the entire change management group was released from the organization. And so, I mean, here's an organization that says we want to adopt new ways of working, and then something as important as change management was released from the organization. Those people were terminated, right? So that they could, save money in other areas. And so that's kind of one of the big things that I see, right? I see when the pressures start to come, right? Because again, organizations are about generating revenue, right? And I completely understand that, right? That is the drive of the organization in order to support all of the people, right, that work there. Um, but to really devalue the activities that come with change management by releasing that group is again a behavior that I see pretty commonly across organizations that I visited.
Yeah, same here. So that resonates for sure. Let's cut right to the chase on that one. I think, again, would certainly not argue that revenue and numbers are the drivers of value creation in our type of work. We like to see positive ROI, and we like to see successful P&Ls for whatever our product lines are and things like that. So, Coach, for a C-level executive or a CFO or someone from that area of the organization, we're always going to have to be able to very quickly justify the business value of a formal change management role or a formal change management framework, and we'll have to be able to make that business case quite quickly, because that's how you communicate with C's. So, could you talk a little bit about how do we tie change management as sort of a structured role or a structured piece of an enterprise initiative? How do we tie that to ROI? How do we justify the business value of that? If you were challenged by a C to make that business case, what would you say?
Yeah, so the ROI is going to be in the actual benefit from the future state that you're trying to change to, right? Change management is about you have a current state, which is the actual behaviors that people are displaying in the culture within the organization, right? People are behaving one particular way. They've got a particular view of the organization from a conversation, from a philosophical point of view, right, of the organization as well. They understand where the good parts are, where the bad parts are, right? And so all of that's being understood in that current state. And then we're asking people to move to a future state, right, with new behaviors and new cultural concepts and new ways of working and new ways of communicating with one another. And so having you know the value is going to come from the change sticking, right? So when we go through and we make changes and we do them fairly quickly, right? Yeah, people do change, but I mean, I think the science has proven that behaviors take a while before they can become adopted by individuals, and they feel more comfortable with them, right? I mean, I'm sure you have, and I know that I have, been in an environment where I was doing new work and I felt uncomfortable, right? It's a completely uncomfortable feeling to say, hey, do this way, and you feel like maybe people are watching you. You maybe feel like you're not doing it accurately. And in some instances, it maybe even be you're just not doing it as quickly as you used to, right? Which causes frustrations. And so all of those are things that people need time to work through. And then as they work through those, they get more comfortable, right? And then that value curve is going to start to escalate once we get to that place, right? So initially, yeah, there might be a fallback as people are trying to learn the new ways of working, right? There may be some slowness as they're uncomfortable with the new processes and trying to understand and communicate in this new way of functioning. But give it some time and let it get baked in, and you're going to see all of that benefit.
So, Coach, I love that answer. And you've touched on a few things that I think are really key here, which is sort of human factors, right? You're not talking about business process, you're not talking about um, numbers on a spreadsheet. You're just talking about the discomfort that people are inevitably going to have to cope with when they're asked to do something new or when they're impacted by something that's changing. And that's unavoidable, right? Because there's always going to be change. And that's kind of why it's so important, I think, is because if we don't have structured ways to deal with change at an organizational level, then we can't adapt to things that are out there beyond our control that are inevitably going to impose change upon us, right? So if we're thinking about sort of these behavioral issues, people don't want to be seen to be they probably are not necessarily resistant to change always, but they are going to encounter embarrassment, trepidation. Nobody wants to be seen that I'm not really good at doing this new thing, or there may be some fear there. So, people like us, we talk a lot about sort of safety culture versus fear-based culture, and that's probably relevant here, right? But what tools do we have available to deal with some of those, what you might call the softer side of behavior in change, right? Like there's not always a concrete tool that you can cause a change to happen immediately. It takes
Yeah.
time, like you say. People have to get comfortable with it, but just kind of in a corporate setting, how do we help people adapt in that way?
Yeah, so it's really boils down to one thing, Chris, and that is communication, right? I mean, I like to say that people need the motivation. No, they need the inspiration for the motivation to make the change, right? So, how do they become inspired, right? People only change when they're motivated to do that. How do they become inspired? It's through the communication, it's through the benefits, it's through the value that you're sharing with them that they can now have a belief, right? Because you got to change their beliefs. You got to change it so that they believe that this is something that's going to be beneficial for them, so much so that it outweighs, right? That value outweighs their fears and trepidations, right? I mean, it's going to put them in a place where they can now move beyond that, right? When we talk about, you maybe have heard the phrase a burning platform, right? They said, what's the burning platform? Well, the burning platform comes from an analogy where there's a oil tanker out in the middle of the ocean that's on fire, right? And the people are on the oil tanker on this platform. It's on fire. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. And there's fear, right? Stay here and burn up, or jump into the middle of the ocean and not know what's there. Well, once it gets to the place where you can't stay on the platform, you've got to jump into the ocean in order to survive, right? That's where we want people to be from a change standpoint. We want them to feel like they've got to go and jump into the change in order to survive in the organization. And we do that again through communication, right? Through activities, through engagement, through leadership showing up and making sure that they're communicating and letting people know that things are going to be okay, making people feel comfortable. And then having the types of tools like training and things of that nature to kind of support the new knowledge that people have to have, right? Coaching and mentoring to give them new activities and new perspectives, right? So they can kind of understand these new processes and come to grips with all of these things and be in a position where they now feel more comfortable, right? They now feel safe, and they can take these new things and then try them, experiment with them, as well as having that, right, having a position of a mindset of experimentation, right? We're trying this, we're seeing how this works, right? If there are things that we need to make adjustments and tweaks on because we find it that's necessary, then we're going to put that in place, right? And so all of that's going to help the people, because that's what it boils down to. Strategy execution in your organization is aligning the people in your organization to your goals and vision, right? And how do we do that? We do that through communication.
You made several good call outs there. So, and I love that roundup. And there's a few things there I want to try to unpack a little bit. So, this concept of the burning platform, this is something I've thought a lot about. And you encounter this concept a lot in our line of work, right? And so I've spent some time thinking about that. And every time I hear the phrase burning platform these days, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with some of my students years ago. I was teaching a DevOps class in a large government agency. And if you're familiar with DevOps, you are probably familiar with the ties there to Lean and to Gene Kim's book, The Phoenix Project, which kind of launched DevOps into the mainstream. And he draws this whole parallel between manufacturing and sort of the quality movement. And so in diehard DevOps circles, inevitably we talk a lot about Lean, but we talk a lot about Toyota, and we kind of talk a lot about the heritage of the lean movement and how it came out of Japan and things like that. And these are concepts that we find retreaded or reinvented for technology work in our consulting lines, right? So those lean ideas and those discussions about Toyota and sort of the total quality, those have been directly informed our technology consulting. These ideas of shifting left and kind of building quality in, and testing as we go, and even the idea of continuous workflows and things like that. But the point is, so we were talking about that in this DevOps class. And we were kind of talking about W. Edwards Deming and the heritage of the lean movement and all that. It's Genesis in Japan. And one of the students in the class, and this was a class full of I think pretty senior professionals, he said, "I've read about this, and I came across a point that somebody made in my reading in which they said, yes, Japan reinvented these ways of working very successfully, but that literally had to come out of the ashes of their entire industrial base, their entire society being like basically bombed back to the Stone Age. They had nothing, and that has always stuck with me because there's a relationship there, I think, to this idea of the burning platform. And the idea there is that, gosh, is it really a current state of complete and utter abject desperation that you have to get to before there's enough critical mass of motivation there to drive successful change? And that was kind of his point in the classroom, right? Was like, they were successful with these new ways of working because there was just no other alternative. Things were just so bad, they had nothing to fall back on. So basically they had nothing left to lose. And that's kind of the idea of the burning platform as well, right? Well, nobody wants to dive into the deep dark unknown, but when you're in a burning platform situation, you just have no choice. You have nothing left to lose. And so I've always kind of thought to myself, well, that makes sense, but gosh, if you've gotten to that state, like, that's not really the state you want to get to. Nobody really wants to outline a current state of a burning platform or complete desperation as the starting point for successful change. And so it seems to me that, and I know I'm leading the witness a little bit here, but only through successful governance can you um, have successful change implementation without having that sort of desperation motivator. If you're doing a fairly good state of business and you're in a current state that it's maybe not the worst it could possibly be, but you also know you need to change, then you may have a lot less motivation because you don't have that burning platform scenario, right? So I guess there's not exactly a clear question there, but if you could talk a little bit about that, is it in your experience usually necessary to reach that complete burning platform desperation state, or can you successfully implement some of the change practices we're talking about, maybe from a little bit normal of a day-to-day state of affairs?
So, great question, Chris. Right? I think both answers are gonna apply. Right? So, depending on your current state and how much change you need to make, it's probably going to determine how desperate your message needs to be. Right? So, if you're an organization like, so for example, you're in the coffee business, right? You're Starbucks, and then you hear that McDonald's is doing a Mac Cafe, which is the direct competition to your Starbucks model, right? They're coming directly at you. That's a desperation move. McDonald's is a legacy in the United States and on the globe, right? So Starbucks should take that very seriously, and they should be a strong message of we can't let them in our space, right? We've got to keep right. You got to be desperate because if they've got it locked up right now, but if they can crack it, if McDonald's can crack that market and get in there and make coffee that the consumers are gonna want to have, then what's Starbucks going to do to prevent them from losing market, right? So again, I think that would be desperate, right? So you would need to put that message in place. We need to keep them out of our market, right? Um, if you've got very little change, right? Your organization is humming, right? You're doing fantastic. You're cranking things out, but there are still opportunities to optimize, right? Well, in that particular instance, no, you may not have a burning platform because things are too good, right? People aren't going to believe that this thing is so important that I've got to jump into the deep. So those organizations actually, I would recommend that they adopt change management practices and incorporate and fold them into the way that they operate, right? So in those organizations, they would do micro changes, right? So maybe they'd be doing, a little bit at a time in particular areas. And if they develop a competency and a capability for executing those types of changes, then that's going to benefit that organization, right? Because again, they could go and they could take and they could do surgical changes, and again, a percentage at a time, right? I think the theory is that most organizations can only handle about 10% of change, right? So, and Chris, when we come in with an agile transformation, we're changing the whole thing, right? So we're changing it from top to bottom. So we come in and they can only digest 10% of it. So we've got to figure out a way to paint the picture so that they can see it, buy into it, and then teach them how to iterate, right? While we're there with them to help them iterate, develop this capability for managing change themselves, right? And implementing these change management practices. And then putting them in a place that once we've left the organization, they've kind of got the skills, the capability, the mindset to kind of continue and take that change journey further.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, a couple of points there. For one thing, if you're paying attention to your market and to your space, it may be possible to embrace a little bit of like small d desperation without getting all the way over to the burning platform. Yeah. And then, another important point there is just um, managing change probably entails figuring out how to kind of dole it out bit by bit, right? If you've got a 10% appetite at a time, how do you successfully get that in? And then, the final thing I heard you say was that maybe you've got an example of a customer or an organization who's doing quite well already. They're humming along. There may not be any obvious desperation factors there. But I just wonder if an organization like that, the fact that they're doing well, I wonder if that maybe correlates with a more mature adaptive state, right? So maybe they actually already have more sort of baseline capacity in place to adapt and to change when they need to, and that's why they're doing well. Coincidence, maybe not, but they may be a little more capable of an incremental, sort of a willingness to change and adapt when they need to. I don't know if that is a provable statement, but it makes me suspect maybe there's a correlation there.
So I'm going to tell you what I've seen, right? I mean, and it's fairly consistent. I've seen change management almost treated consistently across the board, regardless of the industry, regardless of the space, regardless of the maturity of the organization. And it's typically because most organizations started from something small and they organically grew over the years to become the behemoth that they are. Well, that's like an onion, right? You think about an onion and all of the layers inside of an onion. All of those are layers of process. Those tree rings of process are built into that organization where at one size they have processes that help them support themselves, and as they continue to grow, they just add new stuff onto what they already have. So in essence, it's just an organic amalgamation of all of the processes they've been doing since they've been around as an organization, and to change that is ginormous, right? And so how do you go about that, right? So you have to understand, again, iterating, identifying what the future state needs to be, getting people to buy into it, giving them the skills to be able to play in this new space, and then reinforcing the fact that it's safe for them to make mistakes as they learn, right? And that's kind of what we need to do and how we need to drive change within these organizations.
Couldn't agree more. So I think an implication of that is if you're going to create this safe space that we both know is so important to successful change, and I think there's a growing awareness that basically workplace safety, not sort of in the sense of a hazardous line of work, like a manufacturing environment or something like that. But, safety culture and safety process has long been established there to great success, right? The safety records of mature modern industry, they take that really seriously. But it seems like it's only just starting to dawn on corporate the corporate sector that emotional safety and reducing sort of the general fear from incentives that are at play that are maybe a little less obvious or maybe a little more abstract than something as obvious as like, hey, you need these policies and procedures in place so you don't get crushed by this big machine or whatever. That's a little bit easier to get your head around, but it seems like getting our head around sort of the nuance and the sometimes the intangible value dividends of an emotionally safe workplace culture is I hear that raised more and more these days, so I'm encouraged that that's something that has a rising awareness, but it still feels kind of new, and it still feels like it's just getting started a little bit. But the point that I want to make about that actually is that can only happen with what I would call strong leadership air cover or strong executive sponsorship, right? Like at the end of the day, you can talk, or middle managers can talk all day long about the fact that it's okay to experiment and make mistakes. But the proof is in the pudding. If somebody makes an honest mistake, or if they try something new because they're trying to solve a problem and it accidentally breaks something, though that's the kind of situation we would argue, I think, that you kind of want to be able to embrace a culture where it's okay to do that. Because if you experiment or if you try to do something new, then something's always going to happen that's unexpected, or a little something's going to break here and there. And it's still probably pretty intuitive in terms of management, at least, that, at one end of the spectrum, at a minimum, managers and leaders, they're always going to want to understand why something broke. Why did this happen? How can we prevent this again? Let's make sure we investigate and sort of document what happened here. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it can be really easy for that to step over the line into punishment or even just a perception of punishment, and then that contributes to the fear-based atmosphere that we're talking about. So leadership, right, and having basically what I would call like a formal mandate from the leadership layer of the organization that this is the culture we want to embrace. I wonder what you have to say about that, because I think in my experience, often the simplest differentiator between a successful change outcome versus an unsuccessful one, even if you do everything else right, is basically are the people with the power. That's really what we're really talking about, power here, right? And incentives, when the rubber hits the road, the real incentives, the things that are really going to impact people's behavior, no matter what your policy says in words. But people know what repercussions are and what consequences are from the people who have the decision making power. And those people are the leaders. So it really is in the hands of the leaders, I would argue, at least one critical ingredient of successful change, in which people need to be able to feel safe so that they can do the experimenting that they need to do, so that they can work in the new ways that they need to work in. Doing some unfamiliar type of work, there's probably going to be some accidents or some unforeseen consequences, right? And so are they going to be punished for things like that? or are they going to be rewarded? Is it safe to do that? I feel like that basically starts at the leadership layer. So I wonder what you have to say about that. I know that you know, in your line of work, you interface a lot with leadership because that's an important part of the sort of the human architecture of what you're trying to do, right? So what can you tell us about navigating that? I know that you probably encounter organizational politics, and there's probably some sort of intangibles that you can't exactly put the finger on, but anyway, you get what I'm saying. So I'll pass it back to you, Coach, and tell us about the leadership component of change.
Yeah. So the concept that you're speaking around, Chris, when you're talking about, people being feeling safe and there not being fear, that concept has been coined psychological safety, right? So that's kind of the buzzword that's going on. And what exactly does that mean? It means, right, that there's an environment where there's open communication and there's no retribution for being a human, right? That's basically what it means when you're saying psychological safety. And so there are four like cultural shifts, right? An organization needs to go through to kind of get to that place, right? So like four levels, if you are, before they fully psychologically safe. That first level is everyone is welcome, right? So as an organization, everyone feels like they belong. Everyone feels like they're part of the team. Everyone feels like each other, respect. There's respect around the organization for one another, right? Doesn't mean people don't have conflicts, but again, everyone is welcome, right? That's the first level. The second level is the culture, the environment is one such that there is a growth mindset, right? So everyone is trying to get better. Everyone wants to evolve. Everyone, again, respects knowledge and science and business and things of those natures, and they apply those things in their best way to try to help the organization achieve those goals that they believe in because they are a part of that organization. Okay? So that's that growth mindset, the second level. The third level is going to be play in your way, right? So what does that mean? That means allowing people to contribute in the way that they know how. So not putting guardrails and putting specifications on how people contribute, allowing people with their diversity and their experiences, right, of life to bring those to the organization as they are, right? And so, if allowing people to play, to add their own concepts, to put their own ideas and creativity, then they feel like they are a part of it, right? They're contributing, they're adding value to the organization, which is again going to help people feel more compelled to do more, right? Because they're seeing things accomplished, right? They're seeing things get accomplished, and there's no greater feeling. And then that fourth level is continuous improvement. How do we as an organization continue to get better, right? Maximizing communication, removing silos, increasing transparency, being honest and clear, right? People are smart and the internet is undefeated, right? So we can find out what's going on within the world by just searching, right? And so why not get out in front of those instead of allowing people to come up with their own messages? Because in a vacuum of information, people make things up, right? We do it all the time. I mean, I do it when I people watch, right? I sit around and I go, "Oh, I wonder what this person's up to and what are they doing and da 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 da," right? I mean, it's fun, right? We come up with stuff. We make stories. I mean, that's what we do. You don't want your employees making stories about what's going on inside your organization because there's no transparency, right? Those rumor mills get going, and it's because people have a need to know, right? It goes back to those things I said, right? Everyone is welcome. There's a growth mindset. We can play in our own way, and there's continuous improvement. All of those factors are going to get your employee engagement up, right? That employee engagement means they're participating in what you're accomplishing, what you're trying to do as an organization. And that typically ties back to what's the mission of the organization? What are the goals we're trying to accomplish this year?
Man, yeah, uh, couldn't agree more. I think we're so well aligned on some of those points. And I noticed that you start to touch on some things that are, very specific, really, like things that we could get some initiative components around, things that we could measure, even though some of them, they are a little bit soft, they're a little bit intangible. But when you think about communication policies or transparency or measuring engagement, always a topic of interest within large organizations, especially. Those are certainly things that you can take concrete action around. You can get some metrics around those things. So you start to be able to establish some of the environmental infrastructure to successfully drive some of those things that you're talking about. And so that leads me to my next question, which has to do with some of the more established or defined change management frameworks that are out there. So, we've got actually some frameworks that have been created around there. There are some certifications and credentials that people can pursue related to those frameworks. I'm thinking of, things like ADCAR. McKinsey has their 5S model, as they call it. And there's there's some other change management certifications, credentials you can take your pick of. And then, of course, I mean, there's a change manager is a formal job title these days. So that suggests, at least some established and adopted and certified processes for managing change. Have you encountered any of those, like ADCAR frameworks and things like that? Which, if you look into those frameworks, a lot of them are basically about a lot of the same things you're talking about. Managing the communication properly, incrementally getting people from a present state to a future state. Pacing out the impact so that it's kind of structured and ordered in a way that people can absorb. So the ideas are there, right? But have you encountered formal implementations of frameworks like that, and just any experience you have around change management frameworks or certifications? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I use two particular frameworks. I use Cotter's 8 steps, right, of change. That's pretty much baked into Safe as an agile transformation, right? That S curve is aligned with that. And then I'm certified change practitioner through ProSci for the ADCAR framework, right? And so I use the combination of those two, right? So from a large scale change standpoint, I will look at the change from end to end and apply Cotter's 8 steps S curve to define all of those activities getting to that end change. In between, in those different steps, right, in those different 8 steps, I will apply the ADCAR framework as a way to manage the actual intervention that I'm applying in that particular part of the organization. So ADCAR said, so Carter says, we need to make sure we've got stakeholders identified. Now that we've got those stakeholders identified, we use ADCAR to make sure they're aware of what we're trying to accomplish, give them the desire to participate, equip them with the knowledge to understand how to function, right? Give them the ability to function in this new way of working, right? And then reinforce that behavior on a regular basis, right? So that's using ADCAR inside of the Cotter framework. And so that's kind of how I apply ADCAR. I use it in and of itself as a way to manage the direct intervention that I'm doing within that particular part of the organization.
Cool. So you actually regularly employ some of these more established frameworks, and have you found, in your experience, have you found that to be successful? Like when you use the structured principles of ADCAR or Cotter's framework, does that work for you? I mean, if you feel like that's a valuable tool in your box?
I do feel like it's valuable too, but I will tell you, Chris, I get lots of pushback from leadership because just like you said, I found success, and as a result of that success, I like to apply ADCAR as it's spelled out, right? And then and a lot of times it's like that approach feels academic, right? People feel like it's an academic approach because we're following the guidelines that we were taught, right? But the essence is that those guidelines were invented for a reason, right? That framework is been tested through research. It's been tested through, trials, and it's been tested, by other organizations, right? And people have experienced a lot of success using it as it is. And so, that's the way that I like to do. Again, when we start talking about the pressures, the financial pressures within the organization, when you lay out, again, I'm trying to, Collar says get stakeholders, right? And a lot of times companies want to hit a check mark that says we got the stakeholders and it's done, right? Well, no, we actually need to empower the stakeholders, right? And so now that we've got the list of them, how do we go about empowering them? What do we want them to do? What is their edict going to be? How do we make them change champions in the organization, right? So all of that kind of is a part of it, and in order to get them to fulfill that role and help guide that change, right? Because again, the masses are going to look to the leaders to see, are they adopting the change? Do they feel comfortable with the change? Are they talking about the change in a way that's positive? If all of those things are happening, then people feel more comfortable adopting the change, right? And so again, that's going to help the organization get to where they're trying to go, which is, again, this future state.
Right on. And there's a trust component there too, isn't there? Because if people are looking to the leaders to, as you say, communicate, it's probably an important leadership responsibility because the messaging is coming from that layer, and people are looking for the strategic clarity. The guidance on how they should align their work. And so there's obviously an important communication responsibility there from leadership. But at the same time, as you say, people are smart. The internet is right there for everybody to use. So if the words don't match the actions, then immediately you have a trust breakdown because people are going to be able to identify the fact that, oh well, this really doesn't feel honest. The policy or what's happening is not matching the words. I had experience with an organization at one point where there was a dip in business and they started to do some layoffs. And layoffs were coming kind of in waves. It wasn't just one round of layoffs; it was round after round. And at one point, there was a town hall and there was a leadership statement made that okay, we've done as many layoffs as we're going to do. We're not going to do any more. There won't be any more layoffs. And then later that afternoon, a colleague was laid off, and that was a pretty flagrant example. But I'll never forget just the kind of the shocked feelings that were going around. And of course there was chitter chatter and people were talking, but it was just such an obvious example of the actions not matching the words. And I mean, to be fair, in that case, like the leadership may not have realized that was going to happen. I mean, they're not directly responsible for every daily decision, but the net result is, for people who are in the ranks of the organization, they heard something that was stated by a senior leader, and then within the same day there was action that definitely did not match those words. So whatever happened there, it might have been an accident or something like that. There might not have been anything malicious there, but it still happened. And I can just say from my experience, the trust factor was just immediately so eroded, and I can't even imagine how much time it would take to rebuild that trust, and kind of get back to that psychological safety that you're talking about. So I think leaders have a real stake in this, and how they're seen and how much respect they're awarded by the people that work for them. I would think is really meaningful in terms of getting people aligned and getting their motivations stoked up, and helping them kind of embrace a slightly unknown future state. If they feel like their leaders got their back and they can rely on the information that they get messaged, I would imagine all those things kind of contribute. So I think a trustful environment and a measurable level of trust between really everyone, but in particular, leaders who are responsible for wherever the direction of the initiative is going. And so they're kind of, promoting this message that there's going to be impacts, there's going to be behavior changes needed, there may be resistance to change, but this is where we're headed. So people need to get aligned. They have a really strong source of power over whether or not people really do get aligned or not, and I think a lot of that has to do with trust. So that's just a little story from my past, where there was such a fast um, amount of damage done, to the trust and the safety culture there. And
Yeah,
also people started to leave of their own accord was something else I noticed there.
I,
So
I,
there was
I
kind
would
of a
I would imagine so. I mean that level of uh of inaccuracy in communication. I mean that's going to make a lot of people feel unsafe, and so that was an unfortunate situation. Now I've seen something on the flip side of that, right? So I've seen where the leader took an action and it really made a difference in how things were perceived by the organization. And in this particular client, right, we were doing an agile transformation, and part of the as you know we train the leaders around what it means to be an agilist, right, and what that mindset is and how to show up as an agilist at work. And in this particular client, um, we finished the class, and then it's like, all right, go and take your certification exam, right? Well, the vice president of IT took their exam like 2 days after we finished the class, passed it, and was the first person to pass the certification exam for being an agilist. And so we promoted that. That encouraged everyone else. It became a competition. Who can get theirs next? And so now we've got all of these people moving forward with taking their education seriously, getting the certification, and then looking at the leader to see what's next and how else we need to behave and show up. And so again, it's powerful when we have those leaders hands on, right, elbows deep into the work, understand it, communicate it, and realizing that those messages that we give, right, they're tangible messages, they're intangible messages from watching our behavior. But the main thing is that they have to be repeated. Those messages can't be delivered once. They can't be delivered twice or even three times, right? They're constantly delivering the same message over and over again because people hear those messages differently, right? The first time they hear it, they're trying to listen to see, all right, how does this impact me? Right? The next time they hear it, they are trying to understand, okay, I think I understand how this impacts me, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The third time they hear it, they're like, oh, okay, maybe I think I understand what I'm supposed to do, but I don't feel comfortable, right? And the fourth time they hear the message, it's like, okay, maybe I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable about what I need to do, how I need to do it, and where it's going to happen, right? And so it takes all of that in order for people to get to the place where they feel like they can adopt the change and display the new changed behaviors.
Man, yeah, such a good breakdown, and it strikes me as well that in terms of you talk about repeated communication, so there's a consistency that emerges there, right? And even that, getting consistent messaging builds trust and helps people with alignment. But it also strikes me as I hear you talking about, that's a great story, and I love that you could come back with a positive example to my negative one. But there's another form of communication happening there, which is sort of by example, right? So like the how the leader behaves, the example that he set, that's sent a powerful message.
Yeah.
And so that, there's verbal communication, which has its place and has value as well. But man, what a powerful message to send by rolling up your sleeves and kind of being the first to lead the charge by example. So I love that. Coach, we're coming up on our time here. This has been a great conversation. I just have two final questions for you that I want to, kind of pick your brain about a little bit. And we're kind of backing away from the grander strategic conversation a little bit, but I wanted to go back to the ADKAR framework for just a minute. And you mentioned that obviously ADCAR is administered by ProSci. Now, those credentials they can be quite expensive to pursue. I think there's a training requirement. There's costs associated with earning the certification. Do you feel that those investments are worth it to get a certification or a credential to kind of get formally badged in a change management structure like that?
So for me, they were pretty useful. So a little bit about my background. So my undergraduate is computer information systems, right? So that's technology and business. My master's is the same, management of technology. And at one point, I was working on my doctorate in organizational behavior, right? And so organizational behavior and strategy implementation. And so ADCAR for me was just a way to formalize all of that knowledge into categories, right? And into an actual framework, right? So I had changed knowledge already from my doctorate, right? And my experiences. So that helped me to kind of understand a specific framework that I could leverage going forward. Now, in my experience, the classes only teach you the knowledge, the body of knowledge, not necessarily how to execute on that body of knowledge. So, as a consultant, as a former business analyst, as someone who's been in technology and dealing with project management his entire career, right? Someone who has that type of a mindset can take this framework and then understand how to turn it into something that's executable, right? But so from my experiences, though, it was more of the body of knowledge and understanding that and the concepts versus how to take action on it.
Oh, that's useful, I think, and I think it's just good to have validation, right? That some serious pursuit, of change management as a discrete discipline and is something that you can get badged, right, to show that you have some tools in your box to deal with these things. And I mean, I think this conversation is clear testament to hearing you talk about how you structure some of those concepts and kind of bring them into practical implementation. It's just what I was looking for. So I appreciate that. So thanks for that, Coach. I've got. I'll conclude our conversation here just with one last question. Something I encounter a lot, and I feel we probably all encounter this a lot if you're in a consulting line of work in like a knowledge management organization or in a kind of a technology organization or something like that, where there's a lot of invisible work. There's a lot of layers of management, a lot of hierarchy, maybe. Something we encounter a lot is that you talk to people who take the importance of change very seriously. I run into this commonly in the business analysis community, and you've done a lot of work with business analysts as well. I've encountered it also in PMOs and project management organizations, certainly on agile teams, and really all over. But you've got people who are sort of in the rank and file. They can even be quite senior people, but maybe they're not executives, or maybe they're not VPs or something like that. And they recognize that, we've talked a lot here today about the role of senior leadership and how important of a role they play in change initiatives. But getting down on the hierarchical ladder a little bit, that's the people that are actually doing the work. It's the people who are managing the work. And I've encountered people a lot of times who they recognize, number one, the importance of change, and they want to embrace that. They understand that they're going to have to manage that. They understand that they'll be impacted, and that stakeholders they work with will be impacted, maybe even people that they are responsible for, that they'll be impacted. And they understand that there needs to be some of that senior leadership sponsorship that we're talking about. But they're kind of a few levels down in the pecking order, and they feel like they don't have the power to successfully implement the ingredients of change management that we're talking about. Or in the most extreme case, maybe they actually are a formal change manager as their job role, so they're definitely going to be really hip to all this stuff. But it's something I've heard a lot of times, although that sounds great. I'm bought in, but they won't let us do that here. Or, that I definitely recognize the validity of what you're saying, but the problem isn't with agreement in principle. The problem is that I don't have the power, right? So, that's something I've heard a lot, and it seems to be one of the biggest obstacles to actually getting traction with successful change implementation. And so that's kind of what I wanted to close with, and just kind of get your thoughts about that. Have you encountered that, or tell us what you think.
So I would, listening to that, again, you've got people who are trying to make the change. They believe in these, the factors and the process, right? They subscribe to ADKAR or Cotter. They're following a change framework of some sort, right? But they're receiving pushback from their leadership because, again, financial pressures or whatever, right? Um, I would probably say that in those situations, the thing that people will not get in trouble for doing is over communicating, right? So, over communicating what we're trying to accomplish, over communicating why it's important, over communicating what we're changing from and what we're changing to, um, and answering people's questions, right? If they have questions about that picture that you're painting, answering those questions. And so getting clearer on what the vision is as a a line manager or what have you, right? Getting clear on what the vision is, getting a good understanding of where we're trying to go, and being able to support your people by answering their questions is going to get them to feel more comfortable and get there. And in the instances where that line manager might not know the answers, transparency is best, right? This is what I perceive. This is what I think. I'm not quite sure, right? We haven't gotten this X, da, 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 right? I think we need to be comfortable with the notion that we don't know all the answers, right? I mean, I think somewhere along the lines, right? And it's because money is involved, right? I mean, when we talk about money being involved, people don't want to make mistakes, but mistakes are part of being human, right? And so you want to mitigate those mistakes, and you want to have them as infrequently as possible. But the reality is that people need to feel comfortable that they can make a mistake and can still survive in the organization as a result of that. So all of that boils down to communication, 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 right? Because you got to make me believe that I can be successful here.
Well, that's a great roundup, I think, and the dividends of that type of intentional communication. We've talked a little bit about clarity, alignment, consistency, but all those things are intentional, and can happen at every level, like you say. So, and I love that point. That you probably are not going to be punished for being overly communicative. So, err on the side of more communication rather than less.
Yep,
Coach, if people need help with that kind of thing, I can't help but think that that sounds like the kind of thing that if there is assistance or people need help building their muscles in those areas, that sounds like the kind of thing a coach can help with. So, tell people where can
absolutely.
they find you, or I'll give you 30 seconds for a little pitch here as we
Yeah,
wrap up.
yeah, selfless promotion. So you can find me on my website, www.coachclinton.com, right? You can find me on LinkedIn, and that's Coach Clinton Aegis, right? And then I've also got a book that's available on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and search for Coach Clinton Aegis, you'll find my book, Elevation Acceleration: 7 Steps to Accomplish Your Best Self. So yes, I'm out there. I'm on social media. I'm in the spaces. So find me there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And I appreciate you. Coach, I just always feel like it's kind of a privilege to be able to access you and get some time with you, and be able to get some access to some of that experience. And I'm sure we'll talk again. So this conversation was exactly what I was hoping for, and we've managed to chat for an hour, and just really appreciate it. So until next time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right. See ya.
All right. Bye.